Good afternoon. Where does art come from? When we see a great piece of art, we say it was inspired. And I love that word, inspired, because in it is the word spirit. Inspired, in the spirit. And in fact, in the Bible, the word for breath and the word for spirit is the same in both the Hebrew and the Greek. We get this word inspiration from the idea of the spirit being in something. And we use the same word to describe breathing. You inspire and expire. That's the two motions of breathing. All art, if it is good, comes from God. Whether the artist acknowledges God or not, right? Okay. It flows from the soul. Now, whether the soul is aware of that or not doesn't really matter. It becomes a privilege to be included in that work, but God can do it through anything. The power of God is flowing. It is a creative power that's flowing and will express itself through music, through painting, through dance, even beauty in this world. The Bible says that all creation speaks of the glory of God. It's the beauty of creation that speaks of the glory of God. And as Christian artists, we want to step into the flow of what God is doing. We want to be a part and let that power flow through us. Am I right? We want to have God's power flow through us. And at a weekend like this, it's easy, isn't it? We hear great music and we want to go up and dance, and I don't come from a tradition that waves those flags, but I'm thinking of trying to bring it back to my church. Because I think it's so cool, isn't it? It's very fun. But then we got to go home. We all have to go home. Darn. And sometimes at home, we have a moment, like Bob was talking about last night, where we have intimacy and we feel like we're close to God. But other times, life feels sort of dry. Not just dry spiritually, but then our art can dry up. You know, sometimes we feel inspired, but sometimes we don't. And that is where we begin to have to exercise discipline. We begin to need to craft a life that will allow God to speak. You know, that intimacy that Bob was talking about last night, we have to make time for that. That's not going to happen if we're always rushing or we're always working. And so I want to get sort of practical this afternoon about how we can construct a life-giving way of life, how we can keep ourselves in the flow of God's inspiration, both to keep us spiritually alive and to keep our work flowing. Have you ever been in a place where you're just producing great work? You're writing or drawing or painting or dancing, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, it sort of dries up. Anybody ever been there where it's sort of dry? And just when it's going well. But part of the reason that happens is because it's going so well, we forget to replenish ourselves. We forget to take care of ourselves. We forget to connect to the source of all art, which is God. We cannot forget and neglect the source of our art. And we need to replenish our creativity so that God's love and God's inspiration can flow through our lives. So we're going to talk very practically about how to do that. An editor of mine at Outreach Magazine, my friend Lindy, went through a really tough time in college. She had become a Christian as a young kid at a camp, actually through the stories of C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. And she went off to college, and like her sophomore year, she stayed at college during the summer to work on some classes, and a friend of hers, one of her best friends from high school, was brutally raped and murdered at home. And it was just devastating for her, and it really caused a crisis of faith for her. She said, what kind of a good God is this? You know, why would he let this happen? And I tell her story in my book, Listen. And she was a part of a community of Christians, a group of friends who had loved and encouraged each other, and they knew her story. They knew how she had become a Christian, right? So this happens. It rocks Lindy's faith. She says, "It was a crisis of faith unlike anything I've ever experienced. Her friends watched sadly as Lindy rejected her faith, began to live as if God did not exist, as if her actions had no consequences. She rebelled both in lifestyle and her heart and mind. She was just plain angry at God and couldn't understand why God would allow her friend, who was a Christian, to be the victim of a senseless crime." She said, "The God I believed in as a child seemed to be about making everything okay. He was supposed to be a friend. Well, this is not something a friend would do. It flew in the face of all I had heard about God." She went on for a year and a half just living rebelliously, and her friends prayed for her and tried to help. And here's what one friend did. She had listened to Lindy. She had given attention to Lindy, and she knew Lindy's story about the work of C.S. Lewis and how that had affected her faith. And so she got the books. She got the Chronicles of Narnia, and this friend began to read the books. And she gave some of them to Lindy. There's in the last battle, the very last book in the series, there's a picture of heaven, of just farther in and higher up, and everyone's running, and it's this great joyful scene. And she said, "That's where your friend is." And then she also showed her the passage in the first book where the four characters, are you familiar with the story? It was a movie. Okay, so when they first learn about Aslan, and they go, they realize Aslan's a lion. And here's the passage that Lindy's friend showed her about Aslan. This is from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It says, "Ooh," said Susan, "I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, and no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." "Then he isn't safe?" said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. He's not safe, but he's good." And Lindy went, oh, he's good, even if he doesn't do what I want, even if he just doesn't make everything work out. Her friend was able to help her draw back to God by giving attention to her story. And when we do that for others, who knows whose life you could save by giving them attention. Give them attention.